Hey Atlas, are you ready to work with agents? No, silly. I'm talking Fabric data agents. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to automate testing with Fabric data agents. All right, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all the new content and features we'll be releasing in the coming weeks. And with that, if you're working with Fabric data agents, you may be having to update the agent instructions, test out how it responds to certain questions. And that's all well and good when you first set up the data agent. But let's say you are wanting to make sure that as things change in the underlying data, as you augment the data sources or even add tables to the data agent, you want to make sure that it still responds appropriately to all the questions you've kind of done in the past. Well, doing that manually can be overwhelming and time consuming. And there is a lovely library called Promptfoo that can help automate the testing of Fabric data agents. So let me show you what that looks like. All right. So up on my screen here, I've got a Fabric data agent that is using a semantic model as a backend. And you've probably seen this sample model before. And I've linked in a couple of the repos. This is just a open source data source on Marvel comic characters and when they appeared in certain comic series. And I am testing to make sure that it's answering the questions correctly. I also make sure in my agent instructions, if I zoom in here, I want to make sure that when I publish this agent and I make it available to the consumers, it is only answering questions around the data. And if it tries to ask for like a recipe or something that is inappropriate, I want to at least prevent it from answering the question and somebody taking a screenshot of it and then sending it around in the office or on social media. That I want to try to avoid that. So these agents instructions help kind of mitigate the risk that somebody's going to use the agent inappropriately. Now, in the scenario I want to show you is often what you'll do is, if I close this window here, you're going to ask it a series of questions and have it answer those. And then maybe it's not answering the question correctly. You need to update the model to have more descriptions on a measure. And, you're also testing to make sure that if I ask it to tell me a joke, it should respond that that question is not relevant to my purpose. So there's a bunch of different things as you're working with this model, whether you're updating the metadata, adding data, refreshing data. You want to make sure that it behaves appropriately. And what you don't want to do is have to go through all these questions again. Where Promptfoo can help you is it can automate those questions that you see here on the screen. Now, it does require some setup, and the biggest thing that it requires is a service principal. Now, up until a couple weeks ago, this was not available to us in Fabric. Now, Microsoft had a post recently that is making sure that we can publish the agent and then have it accessible through a service principal. So up on my screen, what I've got here is a template to help you get started with working with testing with Promptfoo and Fabric data agents. So I don't want to walk you through how to do that. The service principal that I have today, I've already created, so you'll need to create that, but I'm going to walk you through how to take the client secret and the client ID and integrate that into your template here. So I also, just one other prerequisite you'll need to make sure is that under service principals can call Fabric public APIs. Make sure that that service principal is in the group in order for it to access the APIs. In this case, it's the data agent API. I've also made sure that this service principal already has access, at least member rights, to the workspace. So keep that in mind. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to go to Visual Studio Code and set up the template. All right, so I've got my Visual Studio Code here, and I am going to do a git clone. Let's make sure that that's correct. So these instructions are in the template, and I'll provide that in the YouTube description. So I'm going to clone the repo. So I'm assuming I have Git installed, Visual Studio Code installed, and then in order to use Promptfoo, I'm going to need Node installed. So I've done that already on this machine. All right, so it's cloned the repository. And then the next thing I want to do is navigate to that folder. So I'm going to change directory. We're just going to go here. So I'm in that directory now, and I'm going to run an npm install. So I'm assuming I have Node, but I want to install all the packages needed to run this testing. So I'll fast forward when this install has completed. Depending on your machine, it might be a couple minutes. And you only have to do this once. Okay, so it's installed the package. Now I want to open the actual project now. So what I'll do is hit code dot, which is just a shortcut for you to open this project in Visual Studio Code. So I'd open that folder. I'm going to trust the authors. And I'm going to go and open up the terminal. All right. And then the next thing I'm going to do is, in order for me to leverage the service principal, I need to store it in an env file. Now, that env file is a file you don't want to commit to your repository. So in this case, I've given you an example that you could copy to env, and then the git ignore will make sure the env doesn't get committed to source control. So you want to keep this secret. Oh, so let's just do the shortcut there. All right, so I've copied the file. Now the env, you'll see we need to store the client ID, client secret, tenant in here. So up on my Edge browser here, I've got the service principal already created. So I'm going to copy the tenant ID, paste. I'm going to copy the client ID, and I'm going to copy the secret that I've created. All right, and then save that. Now, the next thing I don't want to do is I'm going to expand the testing folder here. And where a lot of the configuration occurs is in this YAML file. Now, this YAML file has some stubbed out Fabric URLs. So these are the URLs to the data agents, and this supports multiple different agents if you need to run through a whole test suite with different agents. In this case, I've got it stubbed out for the workspace ID and the data agent ID, but where do I get that URL? Well, in the agent, if I click on the settings button, I can go to publishing and then copy that URL. Now, when I copy that, I can overwrite this agent and hit paste. Okay, so that registers that agent with the the moniker of Agent 1. Now the test cases are defined here. Now this is included in the template, but I've got a set of tests, and you can actually have it set up where you put it in description of what are you testing. And then you can set it up so that you can maintain a conversation. So this is maintained by keeping the conversation tied with a unique identifier. So let's say I want to get what's the total of characters in 1998. And then I want to say, hey, do it through, break it down by quarters. So kind of a typical interaction where a user is going to ask a question and then follow up with a follow-up question. And you want to test to make sure that it's meeting certain expectations. So the first one is very simple. Just make sure that it's outputting a length, which isn't, a great test. But the follow-up test is, I want to make sure I see Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 in the output. And this is using an assertion where you can use any sort of JavaScript library, and thanks to like Cloud Code and GitHub Copilot, this is relatively easy to ask to generate these test cases. Now, if I just have one question to ask, like tell me a joke, I can check to make sure that it's responding, the output's responding appropriately. And then for more specific ones, like how many characters were shown in 1999, I can say output includes 231. So I'm looking for very specific answers to the questions. And you can add regex expressions. You can make this as in-depth as possible. But what I want to show you essentially is you can do conversations, you can have one-off questions, and this can be captured in your YAML file so that you can rerun these conversations again and again. And so that over time, if you've got 20 to 30 different questions or conversations that you are going to ask, you can make sure that with the little tweaks to maybe the data agent that you publish or updates to the metadata on the model, that it still behaves correctly and you don't have to do all those tests by hand. All right, and then last bit is the output path is it will save it to HTML in the local version, which we're running here. So with that, I've got everything kind of set up. I think the only thing I want to make an update to is change that to agent 1 because I only have one agent I'm testing right now. I'm going to save that. And then the next thing I am going to do is just type in npm test. Now at this point, npm test, the way it's set up is in the package manager. If I go to package.json, it is clearing the cache to make sure that we're starting with a fresh test, and then it will run the Promptfoo evaluation. Now, in order for it to interact with the data agent, there is a provider.ts file that I've built out a custom interaction with the API. I'm hoping in the future maybe that's built into Promptfoo, but this one seems to work for me, at least if I'm running a couple different agents that we're working with. So as this runs, it's using that agent URL, connecting to the Fabric API, getting the token for the service principal to be able to interact with the agent, and then issuing the prompts over the API and looking at what the responses are. So I'm going to let this run. Depending on the speed of your machine, mileage may vary. Also, if your data agent, it's depending on how quick your capacity is or if it's overloaded or not. This can take, at least in this template, can take anywhere between a minute and 30 seconds to a couple minutes. So I'll fast forward to the end once that finishes and we can look at what those results look like. Okay, so it's finished running the tests and they've all passed, and you can see that we've got the conversations aligned. This is what the responses are. It'll tell if it passed or failed. In this case, it did pass. It also does some tests making sure that it responds that this is not relevant to my purpose. And then finally, the last question I have is, does those numbers match based on the 1999 time frame? Now, this outputs here for me to review, but I can also take a look at the results in the test result folder here. So if I review on File Explorer, double click, have this open up, you can get a HTML report. And this is helpful because if you need to print this out or save this as an artifact for a deliverable saying, hey, I ran all these tests passed, here's a record of it. This is helpful, and Promptfoo allows us to do that. All right, so I hope you learned something today. What I showed you was how to test the Fabric data agent using a service principal and Promptfoo. This is a relatively new capability that we have now that service principals are supported with Microsoft. So if you're using Fabric data agents, try this template out. The link is in the description. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at how to not only do this testing automated with Promptfoo, but do it in a GitHub action. So that way, anytime a Fabric data agent is updated, you can have it automatically kick off and run through those tests. And so instead of it running on your machine, I'm going to show you how to actually run it in a pipeline. But until then, take care.